Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And I'm your host, Ronald Bethay. And you know, if you join us on a regular basis, the slogan for this show, if there's power in numbers, then the positive change purchasing cooperative LLC captures that power for your financial benefit. The positive change LLC serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically Black colleges and universities. To utilize Black owned farmlands and HBCU campuses, develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects. To bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also to educate the African and African American community about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio programs such as Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. The show is also brought to you every week by the National Association of Blacks in Solar and the Black Sports Legends Foundation BSLF Solar Radio Talk Show Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a scheduled guest for our show today, but we have a very interesting line of topics and subject matter that we will be bringing you here today as we are broadcasting over the Positive Change online digital radio TV network. And you can listen to this over our YouTube channel by logging on to positivechangepc.com. That's positivechangepc.com. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we're going to jump right on into our subject matter for this evening as we begin to look at the PJM market area and the impact that it's having as it relates to the crisis in energy production, which will be one of our major topics this evening that we'll be discussing here on the platform of Black America. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to jump right on into our subject matter this evening. And we don't have our call-in numbers up and running as of yet, but we're still working on that issue as we speak, ladies and gentlemen, here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with economic impact on Black America. Now, with that being said, let me stroll down and we'll jump right into our subject matter, starting Mid-Atlantic states officials to join Evergreen in rolling out a new report on potential cost savings, job creation from fixing the what is referred to as the PJM skew. Now, ladies and gentlemen, inside of this specific article, this article was authored by Eric Miller, and it was published through the organization Evergreen Actions, because we always like to give credit where credit is due. Now, as we look at tackling the PJM electricity cost crisis, let's look at this and, and sort of break down what we're talking about. The PJM is a regulatory entity which is comprised of 13 states and the District of Columbia, starting with parts of North Carolina, the state of Virginia, the District of Columbia, state of Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York, parts of Illinois, and Ohio all make up the market demographics. Within the PJM, which is a regulatory body, you have different stakeholders such as utility companies, uh, you have power companies from different sectors. You have the fossil fuel industry, which will take in your coal, gas, and oil industry. Then you have your renewables, which will take in your wind, solar, hydronetics, and nuclear. So there is a smorgasbord of different forms of energy, but the regulatory body, the PJM, determines the cost, the percentages of market share for each one of those fuels and what will be coming online and what won't. Now, what's very, very important about this, ladies and gentlemen, when we begin to look at what is going on the governmental side as relates to the administration, which I refer to as COVID 45 plus 2 with 34 felony counts looking straight at you. We know that as the Donald Trump administration, which we are presently under. And under the Biden and Harris administration, there were a number of executive orders which were signed. Those executive orders, which was 140096, that specific executive order created the Invest in America agenda. Through that, we had what we call the Build Back Better initiative and the Inflation Reduction Act. Also, ladies and gentlemen, we had 13985, which was an executive order that created diversity, equity, and inclusion across all 6 federal agencies and created the offices of EJE, Energy, Justice, and Equity. Also, ladies and gentlemen, there was executive order which was signed 14008, which created the EJ climate movement as relates to the Biden and Harris administration dealing with climate change domestically here in the US and abroad. So, with that being said, this ties back into what was going on at the regulatory entity known as the PJM. And as we began to look at that, reforming the PJM broken project approval process would cut households' energy costs, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and supercharge local economies, according to a new independent report from the uh, Synopsis Energy Economics. Today, officials from Murphy and Moore administration and the New Jersey Senator Andrew Zucker joined Evergreen to spotlight findings of tackling the PJM cost crisis with outlines for economic benefits. The Mid Atlantic region, if the PJM fixes systematic issues with its interconnection skew, the report compares PJM carrot status quo with the reform scenario in which PJM makes meaningful changes to its project approval process would bring reliable, affordable energy online faster in every state model. The synopsis found clear, significant gains for household workers and local economies. The Evergreen was joined by Pennsylvania state officials in a local briefing early on the 17th of April, which was the day that I was able to hear this specific webinar. Now, what we're talking about, modeling projects that reform the clear PJM interconnection skew will drive significant cost savings and economic growth across the Mid Atlantic region, resulting in the $505 in annual average household energy savings, and 313,000 additional jobs each year across the PJM region, a 23% lower electricity bills for businesses and industrial customers. Now, these are things that you'll be able to find in this report. But what's very, very interesting about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania filed a lawsuit with the Federal Regulatory Commission last December. And I think that was in 2023. And that specific lawsuit was joined by the other 13 governors and attorney generals of those other 13 jurisdictions and the District of Columbia. And they won that because what was getting ready to happen was the PJM region, which is composed of 365,000 consumers of natural gas, a 800% energy rate hike. 800%, ladies and gentlemen. This totaled $21 billion, which those rates would have kicked in on January 1, June 1 of 2025 of this year. Now, what's very, very important about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the gas rates are already off the chain as it relates to what is going on in these states. And many of the companies, such as the Washington Gas Company, which services Maryland and the District of Columbia, known as our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., has been applying for new rates inside of the states and inside of the District of Columbia. After this decision came down, that no, this cannot happen. There won't be a $21 billion rate hike on these residents who live in these 13 states and the District of Columbia. But the gas companies have consistently gone forward with filings for rate hikes, and we're going to look at this situation as it is taking place inside of our nation's capital here in another aspect of our talk. But we're going to do a little more in terms of looking at what's going on in the PJM and why this is such an issue. Now, the report analysis that was done on the PJM, existing policies, and its failure to bring adequate energy online, it also offers strategic policy recommendations to unlog this queue and projects online faster. The key recommendations include reviewing requests faster, set a mandatory 150-day study timeline, and pursue study automation. Consider all technologies, create level playing fields for energy storage, and explore alternative transmission solutions. Utilize existing capacity, allow developers to use interconnection rights of existing retiring plants. Improve transparency in governance, make PJM's vote public, and ensure proper representation for consumers and environmental groups. This report was put out by Evergreen. Now, all this sounds great. I get it. I heard all of the speakers. Only one speaker talked about what is happening on the national level. because that is impacting everything that is going on in the PJM region as well that's going on nationally as it relates to the fossil fuel industry. Let's be real about this, ladies and gentlemen. When Donald Trump, during the inauguration, set billionaires behind him and he called in the fossil fuel industry and told them, you support my campaign and I'll allow you to do whatever you want to do. Well, this is what has happened, ladies and gentlemen, because as Michael Regan has left EPA under the Biden and Harris administration, who was the head of EPA, and you have Lee Zealand, who has come into that capacity. He has done everything he can to uncouple and destroy what was done by the Biden and Harris administration. And one of those such initiatives was called the Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That specific initiative put $27 billion into two initiatives. One was the Greenhouse Bank Initiative, which was to fund green banks to provide loans for low and moderate and rural communities nationwide to provide that type of financing that these organizations and these communities normally have not been able to secure through other traditional financing sources in the renewable energy sector. Also, looking at the fact that the Solar for All pilot program, which was started here in Washington, D.C. in 2011, was adopted by the Biden and Harris administration under the leadership of Michael Regan, and $7 billion was put into that program. It went out, you had 60 grantees nationally who have been vetted. They were CDFIs, nonprofit organizations. Well, that $7 billion, which those entities have already entered contracts with the federal government. Now, Trump's administration is trying not to release that funding, even though there have been lawsuits which have been filed, and federal judges have already ruled that that money must be released. We reported on that in our last show about a developer and a federal judge in Oregon who ruled that that money must be released. Well, that money has not been released, ladies and gentlemen. So there are a lot of companies, businesses, and entities, which were many of them state entities, which were uh, cited to receive this funding, and they have not received that funding as of yet. I've had the privilege of speaking to representatives from the Maryland Clean Energy Center, which serves as the green bank for the state of Maryland, and the representative indicated that they had $137 million of grant money that they were supposed to be receiving, which has been frozen by the Bush administration. So that gives you an idea of how and where we are when we're talking about organizations planning and moving forth with short and long range plans, because businesses don't operate with uncertainty. People need to know what they're doing, and you can't make it any more clear than that. But it's one thing for sure: the fossil fuel industry knows exactly what they're doing. And as we drill down on this, we will look at examples, and I will use a personal example as I will look at my personal bill, a gas bill, and share that information with our listening audience, because we try to be transparent on this show, and we try to provide information that we call it news that people can definitely use. And with that being said, this article went on to say that the PJM region is at a tipping point. Household electricity costs are skyrocketing, and affordable clean energy is stuck in limbo. But the PJM's broken approval process is a massive barrier to progress. Low cost wind and solar projects are already waiting with what is missing is action, said Julia Corky, Evergreen Collaborative Deputy State Policy Director. The PJM must stop slowing walking reforms. It's time for PJM to cut red tape, lower electricity prices, and bring clean energy online to meet growing demands. Well, all that sounds great. But what enforcement power do you have over the PJM? What type of actions can the states take other than what Governor Shapiro indicated that he would pull the state of Pennsylvania out of the PJM? And these are the things that and decisions that are going to have to be made by our governors and our leadership in our state houses on what we're going to do about energy. The state of Maryland only generates about 5% of its energy in state. So we are caught between what we call a rock and a hard place. And I know about that hard place because when I look at my gas and electricity bills, we're talking about a house note. And that's real. When you're looking at me being a baby boomer, my wife being a baby boomer, and we're in our 70s, and we have no one living in our house whole but us, and we getting hit with bills of $1,201.77. I mean, we're simply not we don't use energy that way, and it's very disheartening, ladies and gentlemen, when you paying $200 or $300 and you're not even making a good heart effort when you make a $200 payment like we did back on January the 20th, and then you look fast forward, we're in April. If you can't make these type of consistent payments, but you got to juggle with gas, water, and electricity, and all of these utilities are through the roof. When we, for example, when you look at the previous bill, this bill is dated January 20th of 2025. They gave us a balance that was forward of over $1,000, where we had gotten behind. Distribution charges, you're looking at $121.52. Empower Maryland surcharge is $9.48. To use Stripe to pay them is a $2 surcharge. System charge, $11.85. For what? Then you said natural gas supply service. Well, we use $133.84. They claim. Then you have a Prince George's County tax. Current total bill is $298.46. But they're saying that you only used $133 worth of gas for the heating. And we were in the heart of the winter. So that gives you an example, ladies and gentlemen, on how seniors and people who are on fixed incomes, we are being taxed. And it's one thing, they say ain't nothing guaranteed but taxes and death. Also, gas, water, and electricity bills every month. That's if you have a home, it's guaranteed. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we have to find a solution for this for the madness. So let's look at the madness, ladies and gentlemen. How many of you are aware of the fact that I refer to him as COVID 45 plus 2 with 34 felony counts coming straight at you? signed an executive order the other day, which literally took $6.2 billion from the Human Resources HSS department, uh, and it gutted the low and moderate income energy program, which had 15 employees, to basically get the money out the door nationwide. Now, energy assistance programs in the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland, there was a recently news report done that said in 2024, they had 240,000 applications for energy assistance. Well, yours truly was one of those, and we were denied. Because if anyone is making over $15 an hour, which breaks down to $2,510 a month, and they look at the past 30 days, you can't get any help. Well, you can't live in a tree house in the state of Maryland for that. There are 22 counties in the state of Maryland. We have a 6 million population, 150,000 federal workers, and no one laid off of their federal job can apply for help because they've made more than $15 an hour. I did a show around this issue, raising the question, why is the income eligibility cap so low in the state of Maryland? Now, this past weekend, I was privileged to be able to attend a 5K walk, which was put on by the Greater Washington Clean Cities Collaboration Group, which was ran by Mr. Antoine Thompson, who's a very dear friend of mine, and he's the director of the DMV office. It was held down on the mall here in our nation's capital. And the Maryland Energy Administration had a table there. And I was privileged of being able to speak with some folk concerning the issue. Now, Paul Pinsky, who is director of the Maryland Clean Energy Administration, they have put out major grants available for outside the box projects. The Maryland Energy Administration is interested in receiving proposals for innovation projects that fall beyond the scope of the programs. Open energy innovation grant programs provide an avenue for the agency to consider these proposals. Unique programs for unique projects. One of this kind of program of the agency is to design support towards thinking energy project proposals that dive in three areas of interest: greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency for apartments, and affordability. That all sounds great, ladies and gentlemen, about these grants and these opportunities. Yours truly here at the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative LLC, we have one of the most extensive data banks in the country. We also receive emails and information from technology companies and startups from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. And there is a system which has been designed and is coming out of China, where if you live in an apartment building, they've designed a solar system that will fit on the balcony of that apartment with a converter, which will mount to the wall inside that apartment and completely take that unit off of having to pay electricity to run the appliances and lights inside of that apartment unit. But guess what? When you issue 140% tariff, a 240% tariff on China, and China retaliates, well, that just made that product unaffordable for a person who may be living in an apartment to do that. So, with this being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at some things that are happening in the DMV market area as it relates to the a an entity which is our nation's capital and a member of the PJM. And we're going to sort of switch gears. Anyone who's interested in getting more information on the subject matter that we just we just opened up on for additional state policy fact sheets detailing benefits of the PJM interconnection reform can be found for Maryland, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia by logging on to our website at positivechangepc.com. And you can go down and you'll be able to find the article, New Report, Murphy Moore Administration in Evergreen highlights how fixing the PJM can cut energy costs and create jobs across the mid-Atlantic. And that is something that I think is worth your time. There is also a YouTube video out there, and we will be loading that video to go inside of this specific article just as soon as they make that available. So at the present time, it is not available on the website, but as they can say, well, you sort of get my drift as to where we're going with this. Ladies and gentlemen, as I indicated, I stay busy, very, very busy. Normally, we produce our podcast show at 11 a.m. But once we do that show, if the quality of that show does not come up and meet my standards, I will do that show again. So it is now 9:30 p.m. at night, and we're redoing the show, which we will be loading this particular podcast onto our YouTube and uplinking it to our Podbean platform, because we'll go right into producing our show on that platform as soon as we finish this platform. So with that being said, we're going to cover this information as quickly as we can so we can step off to the next one. Now, as I indicated, there's a lot of moving parts to how the gas companies have been moving. Now, Washington Gas has been very busy, ladies and gentlemen. Consumer alert, public hearings this Thursday on WGL rate increase request. This was put out by the Office of the People's Counsel here in Washington, D.C., and Mrs. Sandra Mathis Fry, who serves as the lead attorney for the People's Counsel, outstanding individual who I happen to know personally and have been friends with her husband for over a long period of time. Unfortunately, he's been sick. I hope that he did recover, but I don't know. So with that being said, I'll leave it just there. But her office just recently put this out. Consumer alert. WGL proposes rate hike by 45.6 million. Now, they have had two public hearings, ladies and gentlemen. The first hearing took place on April the 10th. It was held in the Benning Road area in Northeast Washington, D.C. Last night, which was the 21st of April, they had another hearing at the Petworth Library in Northwest Washington, D.C. And yours truly, I was able to get to that one, and I did testify against this rate hike on behalf of D.C. ratepayers. The Office of the People's Counsel urges DC consumers to let your voices be heard. Tell the DC Public Service Commission to oppose WGL's expensive rate proposal in formal case number 1180. Believes this proposal will unjustly raise your natural gas bill. Now, they provide background, ladies and gentlemen. On August 5th of 2024, Washington Gas Company, WGL, requested a rate increase of 45.6 million, which would increase consumers' rates by 16%. The Office of the People's Counsel reviewed the WGL's request and revealed these significant concerns. In April of 22, WGL filed for a rate increase of $50 million in a formal case number 1169 after strong opposition from Office of People's Counsel. The Public Service Commission granted WGL a much smaller rate increase of 24.6 million. Now, they just received a 24.6 million rate increase in 2022. Then just 7 months later, Washington Gas filed this request for an additional $45.6 million rate hike. Now, I just informed you, ladies and gentlemen, that had it not been for Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who filed a suit with the Federal Regulatory Commission here in Washington, D.C., that 13 states and the District of Columbia would have gotten hit with an 800% natural gas rate hike, totaling $21 billion, which would have been due June 1st, 2025, over and above this rate hike that WGL is asking for. This is what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about complete madness as it relates to how in the world do they expect people who are on fixed incomes to be able to pay for this, even though we may have homes between taxes and the cost of living. Everybody's stressed already. This is why I am so, as the little boy said, pissed, because I have to adopt the motto that Roland Martin has coined. Don't blame me. I voted for the black woman. Because the bottom line is there were alternatives to the madness that's going on with the cutbacks in all of the federal agencies and these programs that are going on. Now, we have already done numerous shows about the EPA and New Zealand with the illegal activities that are taking place inside of EPA as they try to renege on contracts that have already been signed. But in April of 2022, WGL filed for a rate increase of $50 million. You got that. Then we talked about the additional rate proposal hike filing. OPC's analysis suggests that WGL would not receive an increase above 9.4 million. Frequently, rate increases will make gas services unaffordable for the district residents, especially elderly and the economic disadvantaged. OPC continues to oppose excessive project pipe costs, particularly as gas pipelines replace projects have made little progress and has been consistently over budget. Also, troubling are WGL's proposed increases to residential and small commercial business charges. WGL's proposed residential charges to DC would be 75% higher than that in Maryland. 67% higher than that in Virginia they're charging. In addition to increasing the energy burdens on ratepayers, increasing the consumer charge reduces consumers' incentives to control monthly costs through energy efficiency and conservation efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the example of why I took my time to be at that hearing last night. Fortunately or unfortunately, I beat the drum around this. We are not compensated. We try to let people know that these hearings, when they take place, they are very, very, very important, especially for the African American community. But guess who shows up, ladies and gentlemen? Folks that don't look like me. Because last night at the Petworth Library, which is in the right next to Roosevelt High School, is as much hood as you gonna have that's left for black folks in DC. It's quite a few blacks, African Americans left in that community, but you can count them on one hand compared to white folks that was in that room complaining about these rate hikes. So this ain't just hitting black folks in the pocketbook and hurting them. And if white folks catch common cold, we got triple pneumonia in where the sun don't shine. Okay? So let's be clear about this thing. So people need to get up off their rusty dusties and get to these hearings. Now, there is one hearing left that you will be able to attend if you missed the first two hearings. On April the 29th of 2025, at the Public Service Commission that's located at 1325 G Street Northwest from 8 in room 800 from 6 to 8 p.m. That is why I went to Kansas Avenue, because ain't nowhere to park downtown, and I'm not going down there to catch a ticket. As I explained to him last night, I came in from Ward 9, inside joke. If you are from the DMV area, you know I'm referring to Prince George's County. But I have my daughter, her mother lives in the district. I have thousands, hundreds of friends who have homes in the district. So the case in point is our people have to do better to show up and show out, because this ain't no joke. They used to say ain't nothing happening but the rent. Well, add your gas, water, and electric bill onto the rent with the car note, and you got a serious equation. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on with our third topic of discussion this evening, because we're going to keep it moving here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. As I said, we had three subject matters that we wanted to make sure that we got that information out to the listening public, and that was number two. Now, our third subject matter, ladies and gentlemen, that we're going to discuss this evening is going to be looking at the creation of jobs and what has taken place in the clean energy industry, and why in the hell would you put somebody in office that would try to destroy the fastest job growing sector in the U.S. economy and jump up and talking about he's going to create jobs with tariffs? Now, clean energy jobs are revitalizing communities. We must defend them. This was an article that was done, ladies and gentlemen, in an online magazine called Word in Black. The author is Nicholas Glover. He did an excellent job on writing this specific article, and we want to make sure that we double down on this article and close our third segment of our show out tonight here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Now, this article went on to say, despite the damage that's been done, Congress can still do what's right and protect clean energy jobs that are essential to our future. Despite all the talk about strengthening America manufacturing, Trump administration is determined to weaken the area where the manufacturing is growing, which is clean energy. That's a fact. Clean energy companies have added over 400,000 jobs in the last few years, a large portion of them in manufacturing, building the technologies of the future here in America. These jobs are unlocking opportunities in every part of the country, especially in places in which is most needed in investment. Disadvantaged communities and rural areas, we should be doing everything we can to make sure communities across the country can benefit from those family sustaining jobs, especially Black communities and places that have been mostly harmed by the pollutants of the industries. Now, everybody's aware of the term called AI. It's called artificial intelligence. I came up with I call one called AE. It's called artificial ignorance. Because this is what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. When we're looking at one data center can use enough energy that you can power 1 million homes with the energy it takes to power one data center. And data centers are being built all over this country. Tory Harris, who is the legislative representative in Tennessee that represents Southeast Memphis, talked about the data center on Roland Martin's show on April 14th. You'll be able to find that interview online. And he talked about the impact of that data center that was built by Elon Musk. Can we say dose? And the rate of health issues that have come about with people utilizing that who live in that community where those data centers are located. We're talking about some serious toxins, poisonous toxins coming out from this gas that is powering this data center and escaping into the air. So you're not just talking about uh, making a buck, you're talking about people's lives now. And the energy that it causes drives puts a tremendous strain on a system that is not prepared for these data centers. Now, the Biden and Harris administration has put billions of dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act into building factories, EV charging factories. Uh, I didn't talk about the one that's being built in North Carolina, in Liberty, North Carolina, which is a very, very small town, but we'll get into that about how it's going to change the total economy. Toyota is, in fact, building this EV battery factory in Liberty, North Carolina, and they need lithium, which is a battery rare earth metal that comes from the Congo. And we as African Americans need to be able to speak to our African countries and our African representatives and start getting some communications on how to develop strategies on leveraging the African and African American relationship between the clean energy industry, which we've been totally left out here in the US. Now, I know what I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, because I've served as the president of the National Association of Blacks in Solar for over 5 years. I'm now chairman of the board of directors for the organization. Even though we are a legal 501c3 charity organization, we have not received any federal dollars from anyone. And it's very, very interesting. When we were trying to get some grants, we couldn't get any help. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because as I understand, because today is Earth Day, today is April 22nd, 2025, that COVID 45 plus 2 with 34 felony counts coming straight at you, known as DT, signed an executive order today letting all 501c3 organizations who are part of the energy movement to advocate for renewable energy and to clean up the earth so it'll be here for our grandchildren, that he's coming after them. But if you didn't receive any money from the government, I don't know what they you don't have you really don't have a problem with that aspect. But they've also come in after our what I've worked for all my life, my Social Security. They said Medicaid, Medicare. A lot of us didn't have any of that anyway, already in the African American community. So they talking about cutting that out. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I have a shovel in my other room here, but I'm not gonna dig a hole, and I'm not getting ready to get in it. So it's on like popcorn. You understand what I'm saying? I'm gonna fight with the last breath of air around these issues. So with that being said, with over 13,000 solar installation and design firms doing business in the United States in 2022 and in 2023, we had less than 50 African American owned run companies nationwide. We got a population of 330 million, 50 states. We got less than 35 companies. And trying to get them to work together is like trying to herd cats. If you know anything about the feline industry, felines, they're some very, very independent animals, and I'll leave it like that. But we have put the work in, and I'm telling you, I can't afford the cat food. The kind of cat food that they need to get them together is a whole nother ball game. But with that being said, we hope this goes viral. I hope somebody pick up with what I'm saying and understand that this is serious. That brother Ali Santiago Ali, who worked at the Department of EPA for a number of years. He was working with the Department of Forestry, and he often appears on Brother Roland Martin's show, the Black Star Network, Roland Martin Unfiltered. I was blessed to be at Bowie State this past summer, and if you go on my YouTube video, you can see a short interview. But he indicated that from the Invest in America agenda, or Build Back Better, or in inflation, including the Inflation Reduction Act, it was $1.7 trillion went out the door. Less than 1.5% of that money was spent with African American businesses, organizations, churches, etc. I had the privilege of hearing Mr. Ron Busby, who is the chairman of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, also on the Black Star Network, which I'm a supporter of. He indicated on Roland Martin's show in an interview that in 2023 there was $846 billion that was spent by the federal government, and 200 billion came off the top to go to what they call minority certified businesses. 200 billion goes to the Pentagon off the top. That left 646 billion. Out of that, African American firms received 1.5%. Hispanics received 1.8%. Indians, Asians, everybody received about 2%. Ladies and gentlemen, 1.5% represented $10 billion. That's the most black companies have ever received from federal contracting dollars. That sort of tells you where we are in this country. If we're talking about a capitalistic society and the government has the resources, and it's our tax dollars too. See, this is the problem I have with the Trump administration. And for them to come up and tell us that diversity and equity and inclusion is no longer needed and we're going to go back to the 1930s and 40s, well, I'm prepared to let folks know that they're in for some serious news, because they're in for a serious fight, ladies and gentlemen. We're not going out like that. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time. I've come to the end of another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future, with its economic impact on Black America. And ladies and gentlemen, remember one thing. The slogan for this show is, if there's power in numbers, then the Positive Change Purchase Incorporated LLC captures that power for your financial benefit. The Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American owned firms, to address the high energy costs at our historically Black colleges and universities, to utilize Black-owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also, to educate the African and African community about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk Radio programs such as this show, Solar Now and the Future, with its economic impact on Black America. And as we were saying, ladies and gentlemen, you can get more information on these job opportunities and what's at risk. Congress should be asking and championing the progress and not putting us at risk as relates to these jobs. And you'll find this article by this young brother. He's done an excellent job. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to go to our website, and I want you to go to our donate button. And believe me, we're truly not the greedy, but the needy. And we urgently need your support. You can click on the donate button, and whatever you can give would be greatly appreciated. And until next week, we say, as we always do in closing, go in peace. Until next week, you have a blessed day and a good evening. We're signing off of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact